Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome back. I know, new background. I'm in my living room. Yeah. So if you're new here, I'm Liz. I talk about some true crime here on this channel, and today is my true crime recap for the week. So first things first, we're going to start off with the lovely Daybells. You know, Chad and Lori Daybell, or Lori Vallow, whatever the hell you want to call her. Well, I guess. So Chad's trial is going to happen. Lori already was found guilty. Apparently, Chad is saying that he was under a ruse of Lori. Basically, he was being manipulated in a way that she manipulated him into a cult. And she and her legal team are arguing literally the opposite, is that he manipulated her into a cult. Well, here's the thing. She sought out him as a doomsday leader and a guy that talks about doomsday and all this religious stuff. So I find it very hard to believe that she was manipulated by him. I find it very easy to believe that he was manipulated by her, because I mean, she broke up his marriage, basically, and had his wife killed, and killed her brother, and killed her kids to be with him. So anything she did is master manipulation against him. So, yeah, that's been a big thing. Also, if they're in communication or whatever, I wouldn't see why they wouldn't be in communication, as because they're, husband and wife. But obviously, due to the legal standing of their marriage, court case, whatever, I would probably assume that there's some definite issues that are going on. So, nextly, we're going to be talking about an identification. So, back a long time ago, 35 years ago to be exact, there was a little girl found, and she was known as Baby Jane Doe. This was in Ware County of Georgia, and she was found dead in the community of Millwood. So the Georgia Bureau of Investigation finally identified her, and they have made 2 arrests in this case in connection to her murder. So this was announced on Monday, that the GBI did a press release, and that through sequencing they were able to identify who this Jane Doe was. So this Jane Doe was 5 years old at the time. Her name is Kenyatta, or she went by Kiki Odom, and she was from Albany, which is in Doherty County. So, further speaking, they went on, and once they identified Kiki, they then were able to charge her mother, Evelyn Odom, who was also going by the name Zemeka Luciana. She's 56, and they also arrested her live-in boyfriend, who was her live-in boyfriend during the time of Kiki's death. His name is Ulysses Sanders. He's 61. They both were charged with felony murder, cruelty to children in the first degree, aggravated battery, and conspiracy to conceal the death of another person. So this came out back on Monday. So what had happened when they found Kiki's body is they went over this in the press conference. So Kiki was found wrapped up in a blanket. She was then stuffed inside of a duffel bag and then put in a trunk. And this trunk was basically surrounded in concrete. What you would imagine the mob doing is how Kiki was found. So, also, I'm itching my face. Don't worry about it. It's because it's cold out. So that's why my face is a little red. So what you would assume the mob would do, that is what they did to this poor little girl. So they basically encapsulated this trunk in concrete. And after they did that, it was inside of an old TV cabinet that they dumped illegally in an area on Duncan Bridge Road in Millwood, which this was on December 21st of 1988. So that's why I said 35 years ago. So they all knew from the scene that there was a connection to Albany and Doherty County, because there was a newspaper found nearby that was from the Albany Herald. So after the medical examiner looked at the body of the child. It was ruled a homicide. Very quick to rule this as a homicide, although her cause of death couldn't be determined at that time. So obviously for years this is going to eat away at somebody. It's the death of a child. It's not something that goes lightly with people. So they spent years collaborating with social services and local organizations in different local states and the media coverage about trying to figure out who this child is. Well, so back in 2019, when there was a breakthrough with genome sequencing, they were able to confirm that she had familial connections to Albany. So in December, this prior December of 2022, they then were able to get another breakthrough because there was a tip that came in, finally. So this person saw what the news released on the anniversary of this Jane Doe's death. So this person basically said she knew that there was a child that had gone missing around that time, and that around that time her mom said that her child went to go live with her dad and then never saw her since. And this person that called really believed that story, didn't really believe that story, and just couldn't fathom it. Something didn't stick right. Well, this is when took this lead and went with the genome sequencing, and they were finally able to identify this child in June of this year. So a lot of the times with identifications, they don't go public for a few months, and that is due to the fact that they need to talk to the families about this person before they publicly release it. So once they were able to, sorry for all the yawning, man. So once they were able to follow up on all the leads that they had, back on November 1st, this is when they were able to secure what's called a true bill. And this was on a grand jury indictment. So basically what happened is they brought both Evelyn and Lister in, and they were arrested without incident this past Thursday. So after 35 years, this baby Jane Doe in Millwood has finally been identified. So some justice has been served in the case of this baby Jane Doe, which is very, very comforting to see. But for it to take that long is kind of sad. I know I've touched briefly about that before. So another Jane Doe has been identified. So this Jane Doe is kind of weird because she was known to go by something different than what her actual name is. So it takes like a weird turn. So back in 1991, in September of 1991, the body of an unknown woman was found in a parking garage. And this parking garage was in Sacramento, California. So this Jane Doe, I'll just give you what it is now. She was identified as 55-year-old Dorothy Sandusky of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. How did she go from Pennsylvania to California? I don't know. But basically, so her remains were discovered in this parking garage. And this parking garage was at the intersection of 3rd and L Streets. So this woman was determined to be about 5'11" in height. She was between 45 to 60 years old, weighed approximately 154 pounds. She had full, wavy hair that was described to be gray-brown in color and about 10 inches in length. So like shoulder length. So this woman wore dentures on the top half, and she lost many of her bottom teeth, as most people do. Sometimes Jane Does don't have clothes on. So this woman had an aqua-colored t-shirt, blue and green plaid long-sleeve shirt. There was a dark green members-only windbreaker jacket. She had brown socks, brown leather deck shoes, and tan corduroy pants on. So prior to her death, this woman was known to use the names of Carol Houston and Amanda Defore. She was reported to have been born on January 22nd of 1935, but once they looked into these names, they figured out they were aliases, and that's not who she was. So she then was entered into NamUs under the profile of UP2382. So in 2022, the California DOJ started working with the Sacramento County Coroner's Office, and they submitted the DNA evidence from this Jane Doe to Othram, and they then were able to determine that this indeed was Dorothy Sandusky, who was born back on January 22nd of 1935, so the same birth date that she gave prior. But obviously she was, she was a native of Philadelphia. She was about 56 years old at the time of her death, and any other details about her life and disappearance are not known at this time. So that is another Jane Doe that has been identified at this time. So next on our list, let me make sure I have the correct one. We are going to be talking about the Preble County, Preble County penny. I think that's what it is. So yeah, who was just recently identified. So we can think Crime Weekly, Stephanie Harlow, and I forget his name. I think his name is James, but they do Crime Weekly. They helped fund this case to figure out who it was. They actually just had the press conference the other day. So the Preble County penny is a case from 1968. So this person was found in a drainage ditch in 1968, and they have been identified. So at first they thought it was a female, and it was going by Penny Doe. That was until now. So until now, as I mean yesterday, when this was released, because I saw the live coverage of it and I literally lost my shit. I was so excited. By the way, if you like coffee, this is coffee that I made this morning, but I'm drinking it now. Gingerbread coffee mate creamer. It's excellent. And I haven't had dumping syndrome from it, so that's great. Anywho, so for years now, they thought that the Penny Doe was female, but that is not the case. So it was released that thanks to DNA, that the Penny Doe was actually Albert A. Frost, who was born back on January 25th, 1935, and was from similar area of Hamilton, Ohio. So back in 2019, the remains were exhumed, and this was so they could go through an investigation that was basically spearheaded, is what a lot of people say, from a detective that was off of the Shelby Police Department, and his name is Adam Turner. So Adam Turner believed that this, we're going to say female at the time because I thought it was a female, this Jane Doe was Mary Jane Croft Van Gilder, who was in the Air Force, worked at the depot in Shelby, and vanished back in 1945. So that's who he thought it was. So because obviously this body was found in 1968, and all the new technology that's come out, thankfully, to identify all these people, they were able to take the remains and basically, sample and do the genome sequencing that they needed to. So this is when they find out it is not Van Gilder. So after this, they then figure out it's Albert Frost. So what happened is obviously they have to present this information to his family. And the DNA match for him was actually his great niece. I'm not going to say her name, but his great niece was the confirmation match that this was Albert Frost. And it's very sad that for years they didn't know. There was no record of his death. He was never listed or reported missing. It is thought through the family that he may or may not have been a victim of homicide and then was buried, secretly buried, but they don't know. So the coroner back then determined that these remains were between 5'2" and 5'6", that this person was buried for 12 to 18 months prior to being found, and that this person weighed between 130 to 140 pounds. But it also is believed that this person could have been dead for up to 15 years prior to them finding this set of remains. So, because of this, that's why they thought it was that other woman. But obviously, now we know it's not that woman. Now we know it's Albert Frost. So what happened is that Moxie Forensics LLC got the case in August of 2022. And what they did is they ended up teaming up with Intermountain Forensics, which is in Salt Lake City, Utah, and Sabre Investigations LLC, who were also involved in this as well. So it's during the analysis, it was determined that this person was incorrectly categorized as a biological female during the initial autopsy, and it was determined that this individual was in fact biologically male because of DNA. So what we kind of know about this man is that he was arrested on larceny charges a few times. He was a veteran in the Army. He was known to wear his Army jacket everywhere, and he lost contact between 1963 and 1964. So he was dead for approximately 4 to 5 years, or could have been dead for 4 to 5 years prior to him being discovered. He was a shy man. He was kind of in and out of his family's lives. He didn't really stick around. He had dark hair. He was left-handed. He had a thin frame face, and he was a thin man. He was a rebel, and one of his nephews said that he kind of looked up to him because that's his Uncle Albert. He looked up to him. There's always that one uncle that one of the family members always looks up to. So his entire set of remains was not recovered, but the remains were skeletal, and there was no signs of trauma, which means basically they don't know how he died. There was obvious signs of foul play, but we don't know. The cause of death was listed as unknown back in 1968, but they are in process of amending his death certificate because reason A, the Penny Doe is listed as a female and he's biologically male, and then B, they have to amend it with his correct name because they know exactly who it is. So obviously this is kind of difficult for them to re-amend this years later, but it's really cool that now we know who the Penny Doe is. Sorry, my watch is going nuts. Now we know who the Penny Doe is, and he can finally be laid to rest because now his family fully knows exactly what happened to him. It's really sad, kind of shocking that from May 25th of 1968 is when we found his body, and it took until this month for him to be publicly identified. It's for 55 years he laid unidentified. Yeah, basically, 55 years. It's truly shocking how long these John and Jane Doe cases can go unidentified for. So next on our list, we have, let's see, hold on, let me pull it up. So we talked about that one. I have a whole list. There was an update in a case of 2 murders. So the Wisconsin Department of Justice and the FBI have been working with Othram for genetic testing to help solve the murders of Terri Erdmann and Diane Olkwitz. So these murders happened back in 1966. So Diane Olkwitz was 19 years old at the time, and she was killed at Menominee Falls, Wisconsin. So this is within the Milwaukee area. So she was murdered in her place of work in 1966. So about 5 years later is when the body of 14-year-old Terri Erdmann was discovered in 1971. And she was found on the northern side of Milwaukee. Both women were stabbed to death numerous times. These murders were not immediately linked together, and they couldn't figure out who did it, basically. Well, for 50 years, law enforcement tried as much as they could to link these women together to figure out what happened. So back in 2021, Milwaukee Police Department and the DOJ for Wisconsin started working with the FBI, and they started working with anyone they could for the DNA that they collected on Olkwitz and Erdmann. Sorry. So this then was accomplished during STR testing, which is a harder form of testing for forensics, because that means that the samples could have been highly degraded, but it's going to take a lot more time for them to sequence basically what they're testing. So they determined they got a DNA sample, but this person was not in CODIS. So whoever it was did not basically complete a felony and wasn't in the data bank. So flash forward to 2022, the DOJ again started working with the Menominee Falls Police Department, and they then took the forensic evidence they had and sent it to Othram. Othram then was able to genome sequence and figure out exactly who this is. So they have identified the killer of Diane Olkwitz and Terri Erdmann as Clarence Marcus Tappendorf. So Tappendorf, unfortunately, did die, and he died back in 2008 when he was about 80 years old. He can't be charged with their murders, but we have a definitive link that links him to the crimes using DNA evidence. They did exhume his body, and they did test sample from his actual remains to the sample that was found on both of the women. So I felt that that was an extremely positive thing that happened with this case. Next on our list is another John Doe. There's a lot of John and Jane Does that have been identified. So this one was back in 2002. So in March of 2002, and we are going to Houston, Texas, there was an unidentified set of remains that was found in the area of the Spring Creek Bridge, which is off of Kickapoo Road in Houston, Texas. So they were able to determine that this was a male. He was about 5'5" in height, anywhere between 17 to 32 years of age. This person had black hair. He was wearing a black and tan checkered Nautica shirt, polo jeans, brown leather shoes, and he also, he had a tan and black Dockers windbreaker on. So a pretty fashionable person, I will say. This person died due to a GSW, or a gunshot wound to the chest, and his death was ruled a homicide. So this case was uploaded into NamUs as UP615. This person also had tattoos on his body, so Gothic style lettering tattoos on his left calf. First two letters are H and J. The third letter is either a D or a G. They can't really tell. There's no other clues or other identifying information for this person. So they had very few leads, and then it went cold. So fast forward to 2021. This is when the forensic evidence from this John Doe was then sent to Othram, and they were able to determine, thank you to the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences, they submitted the forensic evidence to Othram. They were able to build the profile and contact this person's family. So the Texas Rangers Unsolved Crimes Investigation Program worked with the Harris County Sheriff's Office, and they were able to continue the investigation, make contact with potential family, actually have a confirmed DNA match. They then were able to determine that this was 16-year-old Hector Jose Garcia, who was born back on November 18th of 1985 in Hidalgo, Texas. He was reported missing in February of 2002 when he didn't come home after he was traveling to Galveston to celebrate Mardi Gras. So his missing persons case was entered into NamUs as MP 91439. This case is ongoing, and any other future announcements will be planned, and they'll provide more information about this as they become available. So yeah. Our final case we're going to be discussing is about the Apache Junction Jane Doe. This one I literally saw 2 days ago. They identified who this person was. This is a giant one, and I'm super excited about it. So the Apache Junction Jane Doe, was announced yesterday, or the 16th, I should say, that they finally solved who this person is. So this Jane Doe is that of Melody Harrison. So Melody Harrison was a 15-year-old who had gone missing. And so the body of the Apache Junction Jane Doe was found in August of 1992, and this was about 2 months after she was reported missing. So she was a freshman at her high school, which was South Mountain High School at the time, which is about 40 miles from where she actually lived. So she was really young. It's really sad. So her autopsy at the time, they couldn't point out a cause of death, but they believed that she was in the area for about 5 weeks, which kind of makes sense because she was missing for 2 months if she died about 5 weeks prior. So that brings us to she was missing for about 3 weeks before she was killed. So they also thought that she was possibly Hispanic or half Hispanic and a quarter African American and quarter white. So that she was basically mulatto or mixed. And that she was anywhere between the ages of 16 to 18 when she had passed away. So this description would be obviously debunked because she was 15 based on her DNA profile. And so in 2021, they were able to identify close relatives of her or of this missing person. And in 2022, they were then able to report to the Apache Junction police, and that the DNA Doe Project partnered up with them to uncover who this was. So it took about 5 years in total for them to figure out exactly who she was and get everything situated. With genetic genealogy, it takes a while. It does take a while. It's not like cut and dry. All right, let's put it in like CSI and let's figure out who it is. Nope, it doesn't work like that. So when they were able to read the DNA, they were able to find a cousin, like closing in on a cousin at that time. They made a family tree of Melody Harrison's family tree, and they closed in on one cousin. That was like the closest they had gotten because they were working on the case for 5 years. They were able to note that because it was hard to identify her because of adoptions in her family, which if you don't have adoptions in your family, or if you do, it's very hard for you to understand that. So like me, I have 2 adoptions back to back on both sides that really hinder figuring out exactly who I am and what my birth last name would be, because I don't. And also I have, on my dad's side, I have 2 people with the same last name that married each other. They were not related, but they had the same last name. So it kind of throws a wrench in it a little bit. But so because of that and some of her relatives, it was hard for them to exactly pinpoint if this was her or not. So the other thing that they think is true is that they think that she is actually connected to other serial killer cases, or could be. So let's see, I have an article in front of me, and so what they think is that she could possibly be the victim of Scott Lair, who was convicted of murdering 3 women whose age ranges are from 19 to 40. He was charged with rape, brutally attacking women, and with murder. He was known as the baby seat rapist because one of the surviving victims said he had a baby seat in his vehicle. And his crime spree happened between 91 and 92. Melody Harrison died in 92. Our next one is Brian Patrick Miller, who was convicted earlier, actually this year, on the murders of Angela Broso, who was 23, and Melanie Bernas, who was 15. Broso was murdered back in 1992, November of 92, and Bernas was in September of 1993. But with him, he also is a suspect in a disappearance case of Brandy Myers, who was 13, when she disappeared in May of 1992, and he's also a suspect in the murder of Shannon Amick, I think it's Amok. It's Aumock, who was 16. Her body was found in May of 1992, so he's also a suspect in that. He's also considered a suspect in the murder of Adrian Salinas, who went missing in Tempe in 2013, whose body was then discovered later that year in Apache Junction. So there's definitely some correlations with age and with area, but they're not sure whether it's Scott Lair or Brian Patrick Miller. So that, my friends, is our true crime recap for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in a... Oh, wait. Hold on. We got another one. Just got this. Just popped up. So there is a suspect in the Alphabet murders. A video I covered... So a video I covered last year, the suspect in the Alphabet murders has been released after serving 30 years for rape. What? No way. Why was he released? No way. So the Alphabet murders, if you never watched that video, I'll link it in a card, was the murders of Wanda Welkowitz, Carmen Colon, and Michelle Menza. They were all sexually assaulted. They were either thrown or dragged to where they were found by a passing by motorist, and the killer or killers had never been found. So there was one man in particular in which they thought it was, and unfortunately the DNA that was found on the victims was destroyed before any technology could be basically obtained. The DNA that was found on Wanda Welkowitz still exists, and it's being re-examined at this time, but it's kind of touch and go, we'll say. I'm so surprised that they released this man. So the prime suspect in Carmen Colon's case is her uncle, Miguel Colon, who just up and left the country to Puerto Rico 2 days after she died, which is kind of bothersome, but you know. Miguel Colon also killed himself in his home on Varadio Street in Rochester, New York, after he had a domestic dispute in which he shot and wounded his wife, and he wounded his brother-in-law. This was back in 1991. So the other thing with this case is that each one of these victims have double initials: Wanda Welkowitz, Carmen Colon. Like, it's really odd because it's not just the only case where there's double initials. There's two different Alphabet murder cases, and I speak about that. I don't. It's truly baffling. They don't even say. So, at this time, the DNA material from Wanda Welkowitz's case, the police have been saving, and there's no suspect that matches the profile. So, and if there's somebody that matches the profile, they can solve Wanda's case. Not necessarily Menza and Colon, but they can solve Wanda Welkowitz's case, which is truly, truly saddening. But the man in particular that they think killed them has been jailed for about 25 years because he raped or essayed an 11-year-old the previous year, so in 1986. And he's been in Westmoreland Prison in New York. So, let's see, he had civil confinement, and because of violent sexual offenses. Let's see, why? I know I mentioned his name in my video. Let's see, hold on. Alphabet murder suspect. I know this is like real time when I'm doing this because I'm on my computer and you know. So it says this was released about 14 hours ago. Who? Dennis Termini. So Dennis Termini is the man that they believe has committed this crime. So let's see if I can go down here. Investigation. I'm also doing this without my glasses on, so I hope you enjoy. Yeah, so there's Dennis Termini and there's Kenneth Bianchi. Kenneth Bianchi is one that I talked about, and Joseph Nasso. Joseph Nasso is the Alphabet Murders of California. So Kenneth Bianchi was also a serial killer who was a suspect in the Alphabet Murders. But at the time of the murders, he's worked as an ice cream vendor in Rochester, New York. So Kenneth Bianchi ended up with his cousin, Angelo Buono Jr., committed the Hillside Strangler murders. So that's why he's kind of involved. But the person we're talking about is Dennis Termini. So Dennis Termini is a strong suspect in the Alphabet Murders because he was, around the time, he was a 25-year-old firefighter in Rochester, New York. So he is a serial offender, and he's known as the Garage Rapist, who was known to commit at least the minimum amount of 14 essays on teenage girls and young women between 71 and 73. So he was known to have a beige vehicle, which is similar to the one that they talked about in the Wanda Walkowitz case. And the area in which Michelle Menza was last seen alive is an area that he lived in on Box Street. So it's really, a lot of these things are kind of fall in line with one another. So he attempted to end up abducting a teenage girl at gunpoint. This was about 5 weeks after the final victim of the Alphabet Murders. And he lied at the scene of the crime, saying that the teen refused to stop screaming. And shortly after this is when he abducted another person. And basically what happened is that Dennis tried to commit suicide by shooting himself in the head, and it didn't work. They ended up taking his car, and in his car there was white hair fibers, white cat fur fibers, which I talk about in my video where they found cat hairs on one of the girls. So he, because of his suicide, he did die. And I think he's not the one that they're talking about that was released. I'm pretty sure the one that they were talking about is 77-year-old. No, that's back in 2011. So I wonder who they're actually talking about. I wonder if they're talking about Kenneth Bianchi, because Dennis Termini, they exhumed his body and they compared it with the semen samples that were found on Walkowitz's body. He wasn't responsible for her murder, and there's no physical evidence. So now I'm kind of confused. Joseph Nasso back in 2011 was 77, so it's not him. I wonder if it's Kenneth Bianchi. So Kenneth Bianchi was never charged with these murders, but he denied that he was involved in them, which is suspicious. I don't know. As this case kind of unfolds, I'll repeat more, or I'll just cut this whole section out, and that's fine, and I'll do a standalone video. But that, my friends, is this week's true crime recap. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in my next one.